Picture the most ancient thing you can imagine. For most people, that's ancient Egypt, the pyramids, the pharaohs, an incomprehensible civilization rising from the desert. The Great Pyramid of Giza was completed around 2560 BC, 3,000 years before the birth of Christ. For nearly 4,000 years, it held the record as the tallest structure on Earth. That is the very definition of ancient. And yet, at the exact same moment, the exact same decades that Egyptian workers were hauling 2.5-ton limestone blocks across the desert, woolly mammoths were still alive. Not fossils, not cave paintings, actual living, breathing woolly mammoths, walking, eating, existing on an island you've almost certainly never heard of. This isn't a coincidence or a rounding error in the fossil record. This is a documented, peer-reviewed, and scientifically confirmed fact. For roughly 1,000 years, the last woolly mammoths on Earth shared this planet with the people building one of its greatest wonders. One civilization was reaching its absolute peak. Another species was taking its final steps. And almost nobody knows these two things happened at the same time. Today, we're going to travel through time. We'll visit an Arctic island fortress, stand inside the greatest construction project in human history, and watch one of evolution's most tragic endings play out in real time. Chapter 1. The Last Fortress. To understand why mammoths were still alive in 2500 BC, we have to go back much further. 10,000 years. Further. 12,000 years ago. Woolly mammoths were everywhere. Siberia, Europe, North America. They were one of the most successful megafauna in history. Then, the climate shifted. The ice retreated. And humans arrived with spears. In what scientists now call the overkill hypothesis, a combination of warming temperatures and human hunting collapsed mammoth populations across the planet almost everywhere in just a few thousand years. By 8000 BC, the mammoth was effectively extinct on every major continent. Almost everywhere. Wrangel Island, a remote, fog-shrouded landmass, roughly the size of Puerto Rico, sitting alone in the Arctic Ocean. When sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, Wrangel became an island cut off from the mainland, cut off from humans, and crucially, cut off from the warming climate that was destroying mammoth habitats everywhere else. The mammoths on Wrangel were trapped, but in a strange twist of irony, being trapped saved them. No predators they couldn't handle, no human hunters, enough tundra vegetation to survive. They were the last passengers on a ship that forgot to sink. But isolation has a price. On Wrangel, something strange began to happen. Without the pressure of vast spaces and large populations, the mammoths began to shrink. Over hundreds of generations, natural selection favored smaller bodies that needed less food. By the time of their final extinction, Wrangel mammoths were roughly half the size of their continental ancestors. Scientists call this insular dwarfism. It's happened to hippos in Cyprus, elephants in Indonesia, and deer in Sicily. Islands are evolutionary pressure chambers. They compress species. They reshape them. And so, here they were. Smaller, isolated, adapted to their island prison. Surviving, thriving, even, for thousands of years while the rest of their kind vanished from memory. By 2500 BC, these dwarfed, ice-fogged survivors had been alone on their Arctic fortress for over 5,000 years. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, something extraordinary was just beginning. Chapter 2. The Engineering Miracle. In 2560 BC, Pharaoh Khufu began the most ambitious construction project in human history. He wanted a tomb, but not just a tomb, a mountain, a man-made mountain, perfectly aligned to the cardinal directions, visible from space. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. 2.3 million stone blocks, the heaviest weighing up to 80 tons. an average of 800 tons of stone, placed every single day for 20 years. All organized by a civilization, with no steel, no wheels, and no written physics. And yet, the precision is obscene. The base of the Great Pyramid, 230 meters per side, is level to within 2.1 centimeters. 2 centimeters across an area larger than 10 football fields. Modern engineers equipped with lasers have tried to replicate this. They struggle. To build this, Khufu had to invent infrastructure. The harbor at Wadi al-Jarf, the oldest known harbor in the world, was built specifically to ship granite from Aswan. Supply chains spanning hundreds of kilometers. Logistics that wouldn't be matched until the Roman Empire, 2,000 years later. Workers at Giza ate well. Excavations have shown they consumed beef, sheep, and goat, industrial quantities of meat delivered by organized supply chains. These weren't slaves in chains. They were skilled craftsmen, fed and housed by the state, working in rotating shifts. The pyramid took approximately 20 years to complete. When it was finished, at 146 meters tall, it was the highest point on Earth made by human hands. It held that record for 3,800 years. Nothing humans built came close until the Lincoln Cathedral spire rose in 1311 AD. Two civilizations at their absolute extremes. One, the Woolly Mammoth running out the clock on a shrinking island. The other, humanity writing its most audacious opening lines. Both happening simultaneously. On the same planet. In the same centuries. But here's what nobody talks about. That overlap the window when both existed wasn't just a year or a decade. It was 1,000 years. A millennium. And during that entire time, nobody on Earth knew the mammoths were still there. Chapter 3. The Secret Overlap. Let's walk through that 1,000-year overlap together, because the world that existed during it is one most people have never visualized. At the start of this window, around 3,700 BC, the Egyptian Old Kingdom hadn't even unified yet. Mesopotamia was inventing writing. The Bronze Age was in its infancy. And on Wrangel Island, the mammoths grazed, completely unaware that history was accelerating without them. By 2500 BC, the midpoint of the overlap, Khufu's pyramid stood complete. The Sphinx was under construction, and the mammoths had roughly 850 years left. That's the same amount of time that separates us from the signing of the Magna Carta. During those same centuries, the Minoan civilization rose on Crete and built its palace at Knossos. The first cities appeared in the Indus Valley. Stonehenge reached its final form. All of this human activity, all of this construction, trade, and warfare, and on a foggy island nobody had yet found, a few hundred woolly mammoths kept walking their ancient circuits across the tundra. The silence of Wrangel Island in this period is eerie. We have no human record of it whatsoever. No Egyptian scribe wrote about giant hairy creatures in the far north. No Sumerian myth describes them. They were simply invisible beyond the edge of the known world. What would it have meant if an Egyptian explorer had somehow reached Wrangel Island? If they had looked into the eyes of the last mammoth? History doesn't record this moment because it never happened. But it could have. The window was open for 1,000 years. The overlap ended somewhere around 1,650 BC, give or take a century. That is the current best estimate based on radiocarbon dating of mammoth bones found on Wrangel. The margin of error is wide, but the conclusion is clear. The last mammoth died while humans were already well into recorded history. In 1650 BC, Egypt was in the middle of the Second Intermediate Period. The Hyksos were ruling the Nile Delta. The chariot had just been introduced to warfare. And somewhere in the Arctic, the last woolly mammoth drew its last breath. Alone. Unremarked. Unwitnessed. Chapter 4. The tragic end. But why did they finally die? They had survived for 5,000 years in isolation. They had outlasted every other mammoth population on the planet. What finally ended them? The answer, it turns out, is not just one thing. It was a cascade. Scientists studying ancient Wrangel Island DNA have found evidence of severe inbreeding depression. In a small, isolated population, probably never more than a few hundred individuals, the gene pool was shrinking with every generation. Genomic analysis published in 2022 confirmed something chilling. The Wrangel Mammoths accumulated defects in genes controlling neurological development, male fertility, and insulin signaling. In plain English, they were slowly becoming less healthy, less viable, and less capable of surviving shocks to the system. Then, the climate shifted again. Around 2000 BC, the vegetation of Wrangel Island began to change. The grasses and sedges the mammoths depended on were being replaced by less nutritious shrubs. The tundra was transforming. Their food was disappearing beneath their feet. And then potentially humans arrived. The timing is contested, but there is evidence of human presence on Wrangel Island dating to roughly the same period as the mammoths' final decline. Whether they hunted the last mammoths or simply arrived to find a dying population, the result was the same. The triple blow: genetic collapse, habitat loss, and possible human pressure is the signature extinction pattern we see again and again. No single cause. A system under stress from every direction simultaneously, until one day, it simply fails. And then, there were none. The twist. Will they see the pyramids again? Except, and this is the turn, nobody in 1650 BC could have imagined extinction might not be permanent. A company called Colossal Biosciences, founded in 2021, has one goal: bring the woolly mammoth back. Not a mammoth-like creature, not a hybrid, the woolly mammoth. And they are not science fiction. They have funding, they have the genome, and they have a timeline. The mechanism is CRISPR gene editing. Scientists have sequenced the woolly mammoth genome from permafrost specimens and identified the specific genes that gave mammoths their cold weather adaptations, their shaggy coats, their subcutaneous fat, and their cold-adapted hemoglobin. The plan is to edit those traits into Asian elephant cells, the mammoth's closest living relative, and gestate a functional mammoth proxy. Colossal's target date for a living calf: the early 2030s. There are enormous ethical, ecological, and technical obstacles. Critics raise serious concerns about whether a de-extinct mammoth could truly fill its ancient role, and whether the Arctic ecosystem could still sustain it. But if they succeed, if a woolly mammoth walks the tundra again, it will be walking a world that contains the Great Pyramid of Giza, a structure that was already 900 years old when the last mammoth died. A structure that will still be standing when the first new mammoth takes its first steps. The pyramids were built to last forever. That was the explicit intention. They are the most durable things humans have ever constructed. They may outlast us. They have already outlasted the mammoths by thousands of years, and they may yet see them again. History has a shape that we rarely get to see. Most of the time, we zoom in on wars, rulers, and decades. But when you zoom out, when you look at the deep time of this planet, you find these extraordinary coincidences, these impossible overlaps. A mammoth and a pyramid, sharing a world that neither of them chose. The mammoth outlasted everything, and if a handful of scientists in a lab have their way, it might just outlast us too.